This is Lamar, and you're listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. A third space is a term that refers to a safe space for people to come together for respectful dialogue in a spirit of listening, sharing, and learning. In this podcast, we explore what it means to have third space conversations, and we try to model them. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please be sure to subscribe, share it, and of course, like it. The more people join us, the quicker we get to third space as a society. Now let's get to third space today.
Hey, good morning, Lamar. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you, Tom?
Hey, it's cold.
How cold is it?
How cold? It was 4 degrees, and then with a real field temperature of about -5 today when I took the dog out. You know, it was cold, and so I got on this is called an 1892 fisherman's hat.
That's old.
My wife, it's not that old. My wife made it in 2022 or 2023. Pretty cool, huh? And because it has these flappies on it. Yeah. Really toasty. It's really toasty. So, when I stand at the window and look at the penguin sliding in the back of our yard, it's not bad. It's not bad. It is so cold we got penguins.
You got emperor penguins? Can you do the penguin walk?
I can't tell the difference between, the emperors are really tall. These are little short guys. Yeah. They're like the guys at the zoo, that run around and in the tuxedos and go sliding. Hey, do you know what the Spanish word is for penguins?
I have no clue.
Pinguinos. Oh. Which is one of my favorite Spanish words. Yeah, because you could say, "You are being a real pinguino," and people would think you were saying something really bad about them, and actually you'd only be calling them a penguin.
A penguin.
So if you ever hear me say that to you, Lamar, I'm just calling you a penguin. Okay, all right.
I appreciate it. I'm always open to a little bit more diversity in my life, and that would be one of those.
There you go. Well, what's happening in your world down there?
Well, it's not quite as cold. Good. And it's 20 degrees. And I looked at these days we look at our watch to see what the temperature is. It's 20 degrees. And so we got a heat wave going on here in Kansas.
Woo, you do.
I will tell you, we've had the cold. I woke up the other morning. It was -3. And I turned over and shut the light out. I decided 20 more minutes.
Yeah. Like it's going to warm up to 80 in 20.
But no, and I hear we have more coming. So hang on.
Yeah.
But that hat, I don't have a hat like that. I do have a hat with a little ball on the top, which I have no idea what those balls are for.
I don't either.
They got no idea. Yours does it. I like that.
Yeah. This was functional for fishermen, right? So
okay.
Yeah.
You can put a hood over that and you don't have to mess with the ball.
Oh, you don't. I mean, boy, you can just latch this thing down. It's really, really great. So,
all right.
Well, hey.
Well, here we are.
Yeah. And we got a guest hanging out in the green room.
We do.
Oh, this is going to be an interesting conversation, I think. This is, our guest is Liz Weaver. And Liz is joining us from her home in Ontario, Canada. And we are delighted that she could join us. I've known Liz for over 10 years and have done some work with her. She is the former Co-CEO of Tamarack Institute and just retired not long ago, right at the end of the year. So we're catching her when she's kind of catching her breath and thinking about what is next in her life. But she is one of the most enjoyable people I think I've ever spent any time with. So
I know that she has a lot of experience in working with groups, facilitating groups, and facilitating change. And it's something you and I have been involved in for years. And I'm hoping those listeners and many of those listeners here have done facilitating at all different kinds of levels. And I hope they take home some goodies today.
Yeah. And by the way, before we open that door for Liz to come on in, I'm supposed to mention, courtesy of my spouse, that if knitters out there want the pattern to this hat, they will find it on Ravelry. There you go.
Okay.
Whatever that is. So, but that's where she found the pattern. So, and actually, we should ask Liz if she needs a hat like this because, but you know what? She's not that far north in Canada. It's not like the Great White North where she is.
Okay.
She's kind of on the same latitude as like New York City,
Well, people can use those kinds of hats anywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
Even in Kansas.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, put in your order. So
I'll put her in.
Well,
okay.
we should open that door and let Liz in. All right. Here she comes. Liz Weaver has stepped out of the green room and she's here live in the studio with us. Hi, Liz. It's great to see you.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Lamar. Nice to see both of you today. And the door is behind me, so I just stepped through the door.
Perfect.
Well, welcome.
Yeah, that absolutely looks like the door. And so, how was the gift basket?
It was great. I really love the Canadian content that you included in the gift basket. I'm appreciative of that.
Well, you can't imagine how hard that was to get Canadian content right now from down here.
We started with Canadian bacon.
Yeah. Oh, did you include that movie for her? Canadian bacon?
I did. Did that
excellent. The John Candy movie, right?
It's a VHS version, though. I'm sorry.
Sorry, what, Liz. Lamar? We still have a VHS machine, so hey, I'm good.
I'm impressed.
Well,
I do too. I'm impressed.
Yeah. Actually, we do too. So it's just that we can't get it to work on any modern TVs. Is the problem. So.
Yeah.
Oh well, Liz, really, really glad to have you here. But before we open the door to the green room for you to come on through, I told folks a little bit about you. I'm not going to tell you what I said. You'll have to wait for the podcast to come out to see that. But what do you feel it's really important for people to know about you?
That's a really great question. I think the things that I think about when I think about myself are that I have this almost natural curiosity about, people and what's going on and the world around us. And so a lot of what I do and what I think about really is based out of this, not jumping to conclusions, but being curious about, what is actually happening in real time. And the other thing I think is important to know about me is that I learn by doing, and then I like to share the things that I've learned, right? So people who have followed me, whether through the Tamarack Institute or on LinkedIn, you can see that a lot of times I'll be in mid-thought, share those thoughts, and then invite people to share their perspectives with me. And I think it's that kind of good conversation, the type that you and Lamar have together that really helps me kind of learn and then share my own perspectives around that and my own learning.
Well, I'm curious about something you just said, and that is that you learn by doing and then sharing what you've learned with others. So do you feel that you learn most by success or by failure?
My goodness. Both, I think. But sometimes people will say, I've learned more by failing. And I do think that you reflect often in your times of failure and you think, oh, how could I have done that better? But I think when we don't learn from our successes as well and how to replicate those successes, then we miss some of that nuance, right? Some of that really good stuff that happens, in our work with community, in our work with other leaders. So I think it's a balance. I think it's not just looking at the times of failure, but also looking at the times where you've been really successful and what were those conditions that made that success happen and how do you replicate those, going into the future. We used to say at Tamarack a lot, what would we do well and what would we do differently? So it's kind of reflecting on the things you did well, but also then creating some space for some of the failures to also include.
So you mentioned a couple times Tamarack. I was wondering, can you talk to us a little bit about what is Tamarack? What's your role? And kind of describe a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing over time with Tamarack.
Yeah. So I was with Tamarack for 15 years, a significant portion of my career. And I played a bunch of different roles. Tamarack is an organization that is kind of like this intermediary organization. And the big goal of Tamarack is to end poverty in Canada. So that's a big, audacious goal. And we were really, when Tamarack started about 25 years ago, the intention of Tamarack was not to do things in the traditional way, but rather to really situate the work of ending poverty within a community context or within multiple community contexts. And we called ourselves at the very beginning this kind of action learning experiment, and really thinking, could you bring together people from different sectors to have a direct conversation about how poverty was impacting that community and what they might do together to turn poverty around, right? To make progress on ending poverty in that community. And so we started with 12 communities across Canada. Over time, that's grown to a network of 400 communities. And
wow.
What we've seen in Canada is when the work started, poverty was sitting at about 17%. And over time, it's gone as low as 6% and has creeped up slowly the last couple of years because of inflation to around 10%. But from 17 to 10 is still an appreciative decline. I like to think it's because poverty is something that people are willing to talk about, willing to act on, willing to bring a network of communities together and then provinces together. And we also have a federal poverty strategy now that's pretty impactful. So it's an interesting organization because at some level it's working very deeply with communities, and at other levels it's working with policy and decision makers to lift up the joined up solutions that communities have about what really works when you're trying to tackle poverty together. So that's Tamarack. My role at Tamarack was supporting those communities at the beginning, and then I moved into the role of really being part of a learning center where we documented the learning and then made it accessible to anybody who was interested in community-based work or community change or engaging folks with lived and learned experience about poverty in different kinds of ways and in meaningful ways. And then I moved into the role of co-CEO. And then recently I've left Tamarack but still continue to follow their work and still continue to cheerlead from the sidelines.
Oh, thank you.
It would be really important to note that the work of Tamarack was honored in a very unique way 2 or 3 years ago. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, so the Schwab Foundation is a foundation based in Europe. It's a foundation that really recognizes social entrepreneurship, right? And it's a global network of people that are working at the local, at a state level, at a country level, and globally around big complex issues, whether it's ending poverty or it's making technology accessible to folks that are outside of normal technology, or it's around youth and youth engagement, youth employment, youth empowerment. So they really work on those complex issues that we don't seem to get very much traction on. The folks that are recognized by the Schwab Foundation. And so Tamarack was recognized for our work in terms of our work, not only in Canada ending poverty, but also I think in kind of reshaping the conversation about what is possible when you bring together, business leaders, government leaders, nonprofit leaders, foundations, philanthropy, and people with lived and learned experience, when you bring them into conversation together. And I think that it was really cool to be recognized in that way and to be part of that network of now more than 500 individuals and organizations.
Well, I won't get many opportunities to say this to you, Liz. So I'm gonna grab this opportunity now. Before I retired, I was really fortunate enough to get to know you and the founder, Paul Bourne, and to become a thought leader with Tamarack and to be on your faculty for some of your summits up in Canada. And I was so enriched by those experiences and by working with you and your team up there. Uh, that was really truly the highlight of the last 10 years of my work life. And I feel so very honored to have had that relationship with Tamarack and to have been able to do some work with you. And so thank you for those opportunities. And just know that is one of the most cherished memories I take into the next phase of my life, whatever that is. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Those events, those opportunities to gather together, whether they were virtual or in person, and they were powerful when they were in person.
Yes.
It really, the thing I walked away, and maybe you did too, Tom, from those opportunities was this fact that we have found each other, right? Because the work of community change sometimes feels lonely and isolating, and you feel like you're bumping up against, people who are maybe not always in your camp or, totally aligned with kind of your thinking and your take on it. And so coming together in those gatherings and meeting other people that were, navigating the tensions of community change, but also kind of hearing stories of success or stories of impact kind of gives you that opportunity to renew yourself and to think, oh, I can go away from this knowing a little bit more and making a connection that'll be something that I carry forward. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to say, the food at those events was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Always extraordinary. It was, I have never been to events of that nature in the United States that had such great food. So I'm just saying. So anyway, but thank you for that.
Nourish the mind and nourish the body.
There you go. Absolutely.
When we had a chance to meet about a week ago, oftentimes, when we have a guest on the show, we just want to meet before we do a podcast, and we connected on a couple of just location areas and maybe some people that we knew together, and because you are connected to one of these sites that is doing some collaborative work, and a site that I'm very familiar with in northern Indiana, and what amazes me, Tom and I, as others, have been part of community organizational work. The amount of collaboration it takes to be able to develop a strategy, to be able to implement, steps and execute those steps. You're working with some of the best and the brightest of the brightest sometimes in communities. Well, that sounds wonderful, but that's also very challenging. Can you talk a little bit about what the work that you do and things that you have learned about working in communities for change when it comes to collaboration? How do you approach that in a way that you kind of get off of your feet and get moving?
Yeah, it's really interesting, particularly when you bring people together who have different perspectives, different ways of looking at the world, and yet there are things they hold in common because they're at the table, right? So you're starting from a place of, hey, we're all at this table. Some of us might be curious. Some of us might be a little bit, anticipating. Some of us might be there because we were told to be there. So, but they're at the table. So you're starting from a place of we're at the table. And so we always like to start early conversations with a question, right? And the question is, why is it important that you're here today? And what I like about that question is that it's about your heart versus, your head, right? And so it really helps you kind of help people get beyond the agenda to more, who are we as people and why is it important for me to be at this table, right? And I've always found that conversation to go in unique but very thoughtful ways. I remember facilitating that conversation in a place called Prince George in British Columbia. And they were working a whole of community approach to improve outcomes for children in Prince George. And I asked that question, and there was a banker who was around that table, and she said, I have a child who has special needs, and I know how to move within the system, but I know that there are a lot of people in my community who don't. And I want to help them be able to navigate the systems better to help their children. And so it was, they were taking off their banker hat and they were showing up as a human, right? And another person who sat at that table said, I'm a grandmother and I'm caring for my children's children. And I know that there are lots of others who have that similar experience. And I want to share that and my perspectives around that. That's why I'm showing up at this table. And so I think and I think this is kind of what you and Tom do together, when you invite the conversations where we can show up as people who care about something that is important to our community and invite that into the room, it really actually shifts the nature of how we're going to tackle the problem. We're still going to disagree on maybe strategies or, what we should do first and what we might do second and what we might do third, but at least we're all showing up as humans.
How do you find that you are able to, you said as you were beginning to talk about that people show up with kind of different perspectives, different ideas, differences, right? What have you found really helpful in terms of facilitating a level of trust between those folks or among those folks so that the work can progress?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because when we're in a collaborative context, particularly if we're facilitating that collaborative context, we have to understand that most of the participants that are coming to that collaboration have other work that they're doing on a daily, weekly basis, right? And so when we gather them together at the cadence that we gather them together, they're coming in with that kind of work that they're doing in their own worlds and then dropping into the collaboration and then flying out of the collaboration. And then the next month or the next week, we have them drop in and drop out. And they forget things between meetings, right? As we do. It's natural to all of us. And so recognizing that, I think, is really important. And then creating the conditions where you can remind people gently of both the shared work, but also where you are in your progress is so critical. And there's simple ways you can do that, right? Before I joined Tamarack, I was the director of the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. And the way that our chair did that at every meeting was he had someone in the group read our purpose statement. And the purpose statement basically said, in Hamilton, there are 97,000 people who live in poverty. This is unacceptable, and we stand together as a community to tackle this issue. Something to that effect, right? And that's the way you create these it's almost like you're creating ways of bringing the community together and keeping them on track. And though that's so important when you're building trust, right? Because there is this shared purpose that you need to have. There is this kind of agreements that you need to make. And then there's this progress. And we often forget about really saying, hey, we're making progress. And here's the progress that we've made over the last month, over the last year, whatever the cadence of the progress is. And so we go into meetings and we go right to the agenda and we forget about the people that are helping us, get this thing moving forward. And so I do think building trust is about that. It's about both trusting yourself as an individual, as Stephen Covey would say, but it's also trusting the others in the room and thinking about the relational context in which you're working.
I should have probably led before that question for you with a more basic question, and that is, and so we'll just kind of loop back to that. What is the value of trust in building collaboration, and why is that really important? I think as we've talked, we know it's important, right? But it would be useful, I think, if you shared with our audience why trust is so critical when people are trying to work together.
For me, trust is all, right? Trust is all. Because if you have deep and genuine trust and you've kind of identified how you want to work together, how you're going to treat each other as individuals, your collaboration, your work is going to be more successful over the longer term. And, they say that trust is hard to build and then trust breaks down so easily. I actually think that we extend trust quite a bit at the very beginning, and we have to continue to live in that zone of trust, right? But we quickly don't live in that zone if trust does break down. And so I do think that trust, particularly when you are with people that you haven't necessarily worked with before, when they come from another sector, when they have a different experience from you, when their perspectives are different. If you haven't built the trust, if you haven't built the relationship up front, when you get to those differences in perspectives and those conversations about differences in perspectives, they can go really badly awry, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you've built that trust, if you built that relationship, if you understand them and their perspectives as humans, it actually creates better conversations over the longer term, and it helps you go through some of those challenging times. And I always like to work with groups where they spend some time up front talking about values. What are the values that we hold together about this work? And then what are the behaviors that express those values? So it's one thing to say, oh, we need the courage of our convictions. Yeah, that's nice. But what does that actually mean? How are we going to act in a way that shows that we have the courage of our convictions, right? How are we, if we want transparency, what behaviors show that we're going to be transparent? And so trust is about doing some of that really important work up front, right? Raising, how do we want to trust each other? How do we want to be in relationship with one another? And what are some of the values and behaviors that are going to guide us both through the good times and also some of those times where we're not going to agree, where we're going to have to make some really tough decisions, where we're going to, because of the perspective that we have, we're going to be uncomfortable, in this conversation. And it's particularly true when you deal with issues like poverty, but it's pretty true in any kind of collaboration that I've experienced. So there are times where we just disagree.
You mentioned, there's time we just disagree. And early on, you mentioned that sometimes we have, our goals may not be aligned early on. As a facilitator or a person who's part of kind of lead this process along, and when you bring community people together, there's also some history possibly, because people have worked together maybe in other situations or connected in other kind of ways. Have you had to navigate some of those challenges that maybe is baggage coming to the group or the team, or kind of difficult conversations? How do you address those, or how do you navigate those kind of situations?
It is.
How do you handle that baggage?
Yeah.
Well, and there isn't just one answer, right? Because it depends on if you've done the good work up front it's easier to handle that, right? But if you've not done the good work up front, that kind of connection, trust building, all that kind of stuff, the thing can explode and implode, and it's difficult to repair, right? But you can repair. But yeah, I was once in a situation where one of the people around this collaborative table, and I was the person who was the director of that collaborative table, right? So I was pretty implicated in this, and it was a big table of pretty influential people from all sectors. And this one person in a meeting of the table stood up, slammed their binder shut and said, "I don't have time for this anymore," and walked out of the room. Right. And this was a pretty important person around that table. And everybody around the table was shocked. And I was kind of in that situation thinking to myself, oh, this is tough. What am I going to do? And I didn't do anything in that moment. I just stayed quiet, and the room was quiet. Right. And I think what happened in that quietness was that people had courage to say, hey, you know what? I'm busy too, but this is too important not to be at this table, right? And the rest of the room, one person spoke that, and then the rest of the room came around to that. But we had done the work, right? We had built trust. We had values and principles. We had really been thoughtful in our practice around this. And so I think it was a safe enough space for someone to have that kind of courage to move forward. Then what I did with that individual who left was I met with them on their own, right? And I said, hey, it might not be for you, but you're important and you've contributed. I'd love to know how we can continue to work together. What might be possible? Recognizing that you might not want to be there, but you're still really critical to this process. And we found a way to repair the relationship and to bring that person and their organization back on board in a different kind of way. And the group went on, and the group continued to thrive and be purposeful. And that person came back around to not fully participating, but being involved and engaged in some way. So I think it is sometimes when you let quiet happen, it allows people to reflect and to then think about what is next for them. So the lessons I learned was do the really important work of building trust and relationship. Don't always feel that you need to step into that tense situation. Let the group process it and come up with their solution. And then the third thing is, if possible, repair. That might not always be possible, but where it might be possible, go in to repair the relationship and think about, what's next. Because, even though we think communities are large, they're very small. And the network within communities are very small. And so you want to always create the conditions where people can come out of a situation, with some credibility, with some ability to reconnect and reengage where it's possible.
Lamar here. Getting to third space is always free. We don't ask you for money, but we do ask you to help us grow our audience. Hit the like button, share the podcast, and subscribe yourself. This will help us grow. Thanks. Now back to the podcast.
That process is also takes a lot of energy, thoughtfulness, and time to implement, and I understand the kind of work that you put in for that. But as something you said, though, that I think piqued my thinking a little bit is you brought back the team to the values, to the goals, to the what's our task at hand, and just even though everyone knows, I mean, you've done that previous work, the reminder saying, okay, now what is it we're about? Let's make sure we're all, going down the same path for the same outcomes that we're looking at. That's always good to revisit when we've had trust issues or we've had, questions arise. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we don't do that enough, right? We don't keep the core. And particularly in collaborative situations, right? Where people are dropping in and dropping out. And it's not, it's just the nature and the cadence of our work. We don't keep the core up front. And even in organizations where we're in the day-to-day muck of doing the work, we don't think, oh, this is how this connects to our vision, our mission, and our values, right? This is how my piece connects in. And I do think keeping on track and keeping purposeful is such an important part of the work. And then I also think, part of this is that it's okay for people to no longer be as integral to it as they once were. Because even in collaboration and in organizations, there's kind of this eco cycle of work, right? Like people will come and they'll be part of a phase, and then they'll have other things happen in their lives and their work. And then we think, oh, they've let us down. But no, it's an opportunity to grow into the next phase. And so, yeah, I think we castigate people, or we say, oh, they let us down. But if we were curious about them, and if we were kind of looking at their situations from a place of generosity versus oh my goodness, this impacts me, you change your perspective.
It just occurred to me in listening to the two of you talk about this, that one of the things that we don't talk much about, and it might be really useful for people that are in a role where they have to facilitate groups, and that is the courage that is required of the facilitator. The courage to stand before or sit before at the head of the table to facilitate conversations that are many times not easy for people, that are very, very important, and with the risk that as the facilitator, you really don't know where it's going to go. It could blow up in your face in a gigantic way, or everything could just come together like clockwork. And I've been in both situations where things have just blown up, and it's like, okay, step back, repair, let's see if we can go forward. And I've been in those places where, wow, this has never been easier. But I think there's a core of courage that people who wish to step into the gap of facilitating collaboration have to have, because there is no guarantee of what's going to happen. It could be very, very good or very, very bad.
I think you're right about that, but I think if you've done the work well, and if you've really built good relationships, the facilitator is not on their own. Right?
That's right. Absolutely.
If you have, if you have been honest and authentic and curious and focusing on relationships, then you have a group of people that are with you, right? And are part of that conversation. And I think that sometimes we think, oh, we have to always be in the lead. And I don't necessarily believe that to be true, because particularly when we're collaborating, or even in organizations, when we have shared leadership, when we, build that capacity within our teams, and you also are building trust, right? Because you're saying to others, hey, I know you have something that you can contribute here, and that I'm going to hand the lead over to you for a while to facilitate this part, or maybe I'll hand the lead over to you permanently because this is the skill that you bring to the group. And so I think it is it requires courage, but there's not times where I'm the most courageous in the room when there are other people who have that courage. And so, how can they step into that role? How can they ask a question that, coming from me, might not be the right way to position that question, but coming from them makes that question powerful?
perhaps the greatest courage for a facilitator is to step back and let go like that.
Yeah.
And in trusting the process and trusting the people in the room, and not only by trusting it does allow others to step forward in leadership roles, but it also models the value of trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
That as it's not something a facilitator ever announces and says, "Hey, I'm going to be courageous and I'm going to step back and let you, be in control." It's just something we have to do naturally and intuitively, to be willing to step back and let emerge what needs to emerge under whoever's leadership it is.
I agree, and yet I disagree, because I do think that there are tools that we can use in our practice that actually are tools that build trust, right? And I've done a ton of workshops around this. And, one I really like is called a personal asset inventory. It's a really simple tool, right? You ask people, you give them 2 different colored Post-it notes. If you're in person, this is easy to do, but you can also do it facilitated online, using a whiteboard, an electronic whiteboard of some sort. But there are 2 different colored Post-it notes, right? Pink is what you're passionate about. So passion could be, I love my family, or I'm passionate about cooking or baking, or I'm passionate about photography. And blue is a skill that I'm willing to contribute to this collaborative, right? And so you get people to jot on pink and blue Post-it notes things about themselves, what they're passionate about, and what skill they're willing to contribute to. And then they go into conversation and they share those with each other, right? The table that's working together. And what's really interesting about that asset inventory is it shows that we have more in common than we have that we're separate, but it also gives us this sense of who has skills and who has leadership that they're willing to contribute to the group. So I think there are practical tools that can be facilitated, relatively quickly, that get you at least to a starting point, right? You maybe don't have deep trust at that point, but at least you know each other a bit more, right? And you see the things you have in common. I also think there are times, particularly when we're facilitating groups that have diverse sectors, right? Like if you have business leaders and government leaders and, people with lived and learned experience in the nonprofit sector, you're going to have really very different perspectives around those tables. So sometimes you want to have a big conversation, but sometimes you want to create the conditions where there are smaller conversations with like groups. So they get to know one another. They get to feel comfortable in what they're going to say back to the big group. Or sometimes you have smaller conversations with groups that aren't like each other, right? And it really depends on the conversation and the question that you're posing people. But you do have to pay attention to that kind of creating of safety for people.
So you've talked about, both of you have been talking about the role of the facilitator and what it takes, and all of us, at least on this podcast, we've all done facilitating at different levels, and also different levels of kind of risk that whatever we're working with is trying to address. There's all in a community. There's a lot of different levels of group facilitation going on. From, hey, I'm chairing a committee, or from that to I'm leading a church group or a religious group, or to a mayor who's running a city meeting. I mean, there's lots of, and then special projects and special focuses. So all that to say, people sometimes find themselves in situations where they're facilitating and haven't necessarily had the tools clearly maybe available to them, that other than just by experience. I'm wondering, in the work that you have done, you've talked about kind of being resource driven as well. What's out there, or what kind of things have you all done to provide resourcing for people to become the facilitators to be able to do the kinds of things that you're doing in a successful way in their community?
There are so many resources that are available in online, right? And a couple years ago, I wrote a blog about the 10 websites that I visit regularly, because I'm always curious about what resources are, out there and how I might use them and what might be practical about them. The couple that I really like that I'll mention quickly, there's one called from a group called Co-Creative Consulting. They have some really useful resources around facilitating collaboration and facilitating transformation. There's another group called Liberating Structures that have 30 different tools for working in complexity. So if you're the mayor and you're facilitating in your community a conversation about garbage, that's a complex conversation, right? You wouldn't think it, but it's a complex conversation, because how are we going to allocate funding? When do we pick up recycling? When do we pick up regular garbage? How do we deploy in a snowstorm? Like, there's so much complexity in what you think is a simple conversation. So liberating structures helps you kind of figure out, how do you want to tackle that? Do you want to get to agreement? Do you want to get to a point where you're having people air their different perspectives? Depending on what your outcome is, you can use a different kind of strategy around facilitation around that. Do you want them to even brainstorm about different ways recycling could be improved? Right? So it's really thinking, what's the outcome, and then what's the right facilitation for that process. And then the final site that I really like, particularly because it has a ton of what are called icebreakers, right? But they're really group facilitation tools, is called Session Labs. And they have an icebreaker library and there are, probably 200 to 300 different types, and they group them in different categories. And so it's a really helpful kind of single source to find a ton of those. So the other thing that I would say to people who are early in their facilitation processes, don't do it alone. Find someone who can maybe pair up with you, who has some facilitation skills. Find a mentor who can mentor you through it, who can help you kind of design your process of facilitation. There are so many people that have those kind of skills. So if you're new, don't feel like you have to do it alone. Draw on the tools that are out there, but then also reach out to people and say, hey, can you help me with this? This might be problematic. I could use some support, or I could use a friendly face in the room, right? Because y'all get nervous, right? We all get nervous in this process, and the friendly face in the room can watch the process, can watch how the group interacts, and then can give you some feedback on your own personal style. So, and can be comforting to you because they're the friendly face in the room when you don't know others. So, don't do it on your own.
Yeah. Lamar, I was just sitting here reflecting on how both you and I started in all of this back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was like throw us into a room and and facilitate. Okay.
And we did survive.
We survived, but
how many times have we driven away from some place that we facilitated and we thought, oh gosh. Oh my God.
Yeah. What did I just do?
What did I do? Oh my goodness. And there's been at least one place that I sped home away from and kept watching in the rearview mirror that nobody was following me. I just want to say.
Is that the place you are not going back to, Tom, still this time?
I haven't been back since, yes.
Well, we all have those stories. Well, you talk about the resources, and I'm so thankful that you've been able to share those, and we can put those in our show notes too for people to be able to look at, and the resources you've actually created. If we can kind of move to a different type of resource that you have recently created about workplace transitions. We're all at the age where we've been through multiple workplace transitions, and we're kind of moving into that phase of our lives where, significant changes are happening. Tell us about this project that you've been working on, because I find it fascinating.
Yeah, this is another one of my learning by doing kind of processes, right? Or doing by learning. Maybe it's a little bit of both. So I recently kind of left Tamarack, and I had a long goodbye. I had 11 months from when I put in my letter of resignation to when I actually left, which is, I would never wish that on my favorite friend. Um, but in that process, I started to think a lot about how I was feeling, right? About everything. And sometimes I was like really excited and really motivated about the next step. And then sometimes I was a little bit like, why are they doing that? And, what's happening here? And why am I feeling anxious about something, or sometimes fearful, or sometimes just frankly mad? Um, so I was, kind of checking all of this as I was going through. And then I started to have conversations with people. Like I had a conversation with Tom, but with a group of other people that I met who were kind of going through similar things. They were moving to a new job, or they had recently left, or they were thinking about leaving. And so as I was having these conversations, it started me thinking, yeah, transitions happen a lot. And maybe it's my peer group, but my peer group was pretty wide and pretty diverse. And I found a piece of information from Michael Watkins, who wrote The First 90 Days. And he basically, in a web-based presentation I found, said that people go through transitions every 1.5 years. And so I started to reflect on my time at Tamarack, and I thought, oh yeah, okay, so I came in as a director, then I moved into being a vice president, then I moved into the co-CEO role. We went from a small board to a big board. We had 3 strategic plans happen during that time that I was there. So I started to count. My team changed radically. Even within Tamarack, I took on new responsibilities and new areas. I moved us from kind of only focusing on community to being this kind of learning center. So there was lots of things always going on in my life. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting that we all experience transitions, on such a regular basis. And yet when we hand in our letter of resignation, we give all the power away. Or when we navigate this transition, we let it wash over us and not look upon it as an opportunity. And Lamar, you were talking, at the beginning of, prior to us all going on a call, about strategic planning, which is a transition, right? It's a workplace transition. And so I thought I would write a couple of pages about my journey of a workplace transition and like navigating your emotions around that. And what started as like a 5 to 10 page resource became this guide that looks at not only, this whole idea of workplace transitions, but then thinking about what do you do pre-transition? How do you navigate a 90-day or a 21-day transition? And then what do you do post-transition, right? And the intention of the guide is to at least give people the space for reflection, and also the space for them understanding that, the emotions are real. You're going to be happy. You're going to be sad. You're going to be angry. You're going to be motivated. And then, there will be grief and loss that you go through, because a lot of our identity comes from the places that we work and the belonging that we have to that place and to the people in that place. And so, yeah, it's so fascinating. And so, I've written the guide in such a way that people can download the whole thing and thumb through it when it's relevant to them, or go to the chapter that is most relevant to them, or the section that's most relevant to them, and work their way through that. And it's really designed to pose a lot of questions, but also give some people some useful information, I hope, about, so you handed in your letter of resignation. How do you get some of your own power back? How do you contribute to the messaging? How are you invited to share your knowledge? How do you keep the things that you're really proud about in the work that you are thinking about leaving? How do you carry that forward? And so it's just, it's a kind of that, the intention is to give people that opportunity to be reflective.
Very nice.
Well, I would have loved to have had that document when I was leaving my last situation. I did an 18-month transition, and it was a buyout. And it's like, I remember one day just being really close to the cliff, and I might have reached out to Tom, saying, "Talk me off the cliff."
I remember that conversation, actually, Lamar.
But there, transitions are can be a very healthy process too if it's done well, and relationships stay intact, etc. So I'm looking forward to reading this, and we'll post a link to it as well, because we want to get that word out.
I think the other really important thing is that, if we look at the three of us, we're kind of in the stage, but think about the knowledge that is in this collective room, right? And isn't it sad to think about how that knowledge is often wasted by organizations because people have not had that time to reflect, people haven't had the conversation, or they don't even have the process, right, to capture some of that knowledge in a way that can be helpful. One of the things that I realized, and I had a conversation with folks at Tamarack about this, was, I had this whole network of people, right, that I've been connected to. Because when you're in an organization for a significant period of time, you have a network. And so they were bringing in a person to replace part of my work. And wouldn't it have been lovely to have a joint letter between me and this person that went out to the network that I had assembled to say, hey, we're really excited about this transition. And here's, Joe Smith. Joe brings these unique skills, and I'm excited and supportive of the way that they will show up in this new conversation. And, please meet Joe, kind of thing. And I think we miss those opportunities, and organizations are poorer as a result of that. And so it can be simple things like that are important. The other part of the guide that someone said to me towards the end of writing the guide, hey, you should write also about terminations and transitions, right? Because that's a reality. We're seeing a lot more downsizing or right-sizing of organizations, and sometimes it's performance, but sometimes it's also because the organization is maybe facing a financial crisis, or maybe had some funding withdrawn. And so they're having to make a very difficult choice. And so how can you come out of those situations? If you're the person being terminated, how can you come out also still feeling proud about the contributions that you've made, right? And recognizing that the future is positive as well, potentially could be positive as well for you. So while we don't want to talk about that very often, I do think it's important to kind of consider, the feelings that you have during that time and what your practical next steps are in that situation. So it's a challenging part of transitions, but also one I've navigated, in my past as well. So it's a reality that we face as well.
Lamar here. I know that this podcast is going a little long today, but hang in there with us. It's going to be worth it. If you need to take a break, go ahead. And while on the break, be sure to take a moment and hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe. Share this podcast with somebody, and even send us a comment. You can send me an email at lamarthirdspace@gmail.com. Now remember, that's Lamar, the number 3, RD. Now back to the podcast.
Well, Liz, we're going to begin to wind down this conversation a little bit, but it's been really great, and I really have appreciated you coming on and doing this. You and I have talked many times over the year, and sometimes, or over the years, sometimes it ends up giving us more work, when we do, because we end up writing something or something like that. But This has really been great just to hang out with you and Lamar at this time. We want to wrap up with two questions for you. And it's something that we've started asking all of our guests, largely because of the influence of one of our guests named Jules Casey in the United Kingdom, who really got us thinking about kindness. And so the first question is this: what is an act of kindness that you have received?
Yeah, there are so many. But the one that moved me really deeply was when I don't know, I was on LinkedIn, and there was a message on LinkedIn, right? A personal message, as you sometimes get on LinkedIn. And this person wrote about themselves, but more importantly, wrote about the impact of the work that I had been involved in and that Tamarack had been involved in, and how that really shifted their perspective and shifted the way that they worked, and they shared their appreciation for that. And it was something that I was so moved by that act of kindness, because it wasn't anything I asked for. It wasn't anything that I expected, but it really made me think so much about how sometimes we're out there doing work and we don't know the splash and ripples of that. And for people to, reach out and let you know that is just such an act of kindness. And I shared that broadly with my team, because it wasn't about me. It was really about our collective impact on people, right? And the gift that we have been given to be able to try to spread good in the world in a way that I think does make a difference. So yeah, that's such I continue to reflect on that email or that LinkedIn note, and so yeah, I feel like that was such kindness.
And sometimes we don't even know we need those acts of kindness until they happen, right?
Yeah.
So the second question then is, what is an act of kindness you have given and you hope it may make a difference?
Oh, yeah. So at Tamarack, when I was there, we had each staff person had a fund called the Gratitude Fund, right? Which was a small amount of money that each person had, where they could express gratitude to people that supported the work of Tamarack in some way. And so I think I've given lots of gratitude gifts to people that have been important to me. But I find that it's that kind of handwritten note, that card that, you can send to someone to say, hey, I noticed, I care about you. Here's the difference that you've made in my life, that I think is so important, because in these days, I think it's even more important, right? To be able to reach out to someone in a personal way and say, hey, like, I consider you a friend, or I'm really thinking about you, and I care about you, and I want to just let you know that. So yeah, I try to do that as much as possible, and to be to show up for people when they need just that kind of friend show up.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, indeed, Liz, I can personally testify you are a very kind person. And I have received many gifts of kindness from you over the years, and I so appreciate it. Thank you. Lamar, you want to take us home here?
Well, let's ask one last question.
Okay.
Do you have a question? Do you have a question for us?
That's right. We forgot about that.
I love these conversations. I would recommend folks that want to engage in, getting to a third space, finding that space in the middle that we can all agree to, even though we have our own perspectives. I think that that's a really important, it's important work that you guys are doing in your podcast. What's the one thing that sits with you from the conversations that you've had that has made you, maybe you've disagreed with it. This is a great facilitation tool that I often use with group, and it's really an interesting tool. So what is something that you've heard that you've disagreed with, but then made you shift your thinking in your podcast conversations?
But we just recently had a conversation with a legislator in Kansas, and we were talking about school choice. And we had a very open and frank discussion about that. He and I are not on the same page on that. I'm anti-school choice, and he is very pro school choice. Well, we had a really good exchange of ideas and thoughts on it, and I did not shift my position per se. I didn't swing all the way over there by any means. But what I came to realize was the complexity of the issue, and the fact that the solution is really found in a third way, not in the way that opposite sides are saying. There has to be a third way for us to figure that out. And I would have to say that was a bit of a shift for me. But that's the first thing that comes to mind. And by the way, people can get that podcast. It was it was our first one of season 4. And so go back and listen to it if you haven't heard it.
That was a really interesting conversation we had, and we're going to do some follow up with that, by the way. But for me, what a good question. For me, I'm pulling together actually multiple kinds of experiences we've had in our 3+ seasons. That seems to be, that really has pushed me to kind of live up to what I have been talking about for a lot of years. And that is being able to see all sides of things. And Tom, you kind of alluded to that in this particular story.
Mm-hmm.
Being a leader and a facilitator over the years, it's easy. Golly, it's really easy to try to manipulate a conversation or a process. It really is. You can get people to agree or to go directions that if you use a certain technique or two. And I really look at the roles that I play and have played. What's the influence that I have on people around me? And have I been able to demonstrate the willingness to look at all sides equally? This podcast, these experiences have really challenged me to work harder at looking from another person's perspective versus trying to lead down a road that I think is the best road. And that, to me, created a little bit of anxiety and still does sometimes. But I found myself at a much better place in my roles of interacting with people when I'm able to do that. And that's, I don't know if that's clear enough, but I think for me, it's been pretty significant to really work hard at listening to all sides and giving and providing value to another person's perspective that I may not totally understand or agree with. So it's similar to Tom's, I guess, but it's over a bunch of different people we have talked with and people we've talked with about this podcast outside of the podcast.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I love
it's been life-changing.
Yeah. I love your answers, but also I think the question is such a provocative question, right? Because mostly when we end meetings, we ask people, what's one thing you liked about the meeting or one thing that sat with you? And that's kind of first level learning. But third level learning is when you actually reflect on things you disagreed with, right? So, it's really kind of like I saw both of you pause and reflect and go a little bit deeper. And so again, trust is, you build trust by having more challenging conversations, right? and creating the space for that. So thank you.
Yeah.
I do think,
Thank you.
I think it's like, it's when we're challenged in our own thinking. Someone said to me once when I first started the work at the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty, they said to me, and this is a person I have a great deal of respect for, how are you both part of the problem of poverty and how can you be part of the solution? And that was like such a pivotal question for me because I was contributing to the problem and I had to face up to that, but I could be part of the solution and I could face up to that as well. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all the work you've been doing.
Yeah. No worries.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Liz. We so appreciate you being here today. And maybe we should try to have you back on in a few months here and check in and see what's happening in your life at that time and see what else you've been writing, because I know you're not going to stop writing.
No, I can't. I keep learning by doing, so I keep writing.
There you go. Go.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.
Well, thank you. You take care. Wow, that was an enjoyable conversation, wasn't it?
It really was. I just love talking to Liz. I have so much fun talking to her. I really do.
She's a very engaging person, has had a lot of interesting experience.
Yeah.
And I knew when we got started here that we have some kind of kindred spirits here in kind of the work that we've done over the years. So it was great to have that conversation.
Yeah, it was. Anything speak to you specifically from our time with her?
Well, collaboration, the whole conversation around collaboration is very relevant for most of us, is relevant for me. I just was in a meeting last night, a strategic planning meeting for a board that I sit on, and collaboration, community collaboration was like number 2 on our list of values that we needed to continue to develop and work towards. So, it was just extremely relevant. Liz could have joined that meeting last night with us, and although we had a great facilitator, it was right down my alley and our community's alley. So, yeah,
that's
I thought
nice.
Collaboration was a big deal.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that part of the conversation too, and I think that's probably the topic that Liz and I have spent the most time talking about on Zoom and on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
and we've done some writing together on that. That's certainly a place where over the last few years her work has really come into sharp focus. I think that our brief voyage into the concept of trust was really important. And how that and that's what that stands out to me. I think that there is no more important thing that we do than to try to build trust among people when they're trying to find a way to work together. And at the same time, there's nothing more difficult to do than build trust. It just takes time. It's about the relationship. It's so important. And I appreciated her really highlighting that for us. That was good.
I think when we talked about how trust functions within a collaborative group, and how it could also be a dysfunctional situation too, as something that you have to fix or work at, because working with people is not necessarily easy, and there's a lot of curveballs and there's baggage that people bring to the whole conversation. So I agree with you. I think that conversation about trust was very insightful, and there's some good resources that she's mentioning that we want to encourage people to take a look at.
Yep, those will all be in the show notes as well. Well, we there's a couple things that we probably need to give some attention to before we go today. And this will extend our podcast just a little bit, but we think it's important. One is that a few days before we recorded this podcast with Liz, there was another death in Minneapolis, and it was the death of Alex Preddy, who had attempted to intervene and protect a woman who was being pushed to the ground by ICE officers. we had done a podcast about about gaslighting and the death of Renee Good. And we left open the fact that, there was some question about what had really happened there, but we hoped that an investigation would make that clear. We since learned that the state of Minnesota was kept out of that investigation. That may be changing even as we speak right now, though, because the death of Alex Preddy has had some pretty big shockwaves. But when you look at the videos that have been shot of Alex Preddy's death, there's no dispute. We've seen those videos at several different angles. We've seen the stills. You look at that and you know what happened there was just so incredibly wrong. And so we need to acknowledge that it is such an extremely sad state that we're in, that American citizens are being shot by agents of the United States federal government.
Tom, I think I'm going to use that word that you like that I bring in once in a while, behooves. I think it behooves us. Behooves us that we should explain. You and I have try not to make this a political podcast. There are plenty of those around.
Right.
However, that cannot preclude us from talking about the things that happen. And we have tried to address those as straightforward as we can. And regardless of where you're at, left, right, or center, when you see someone who is shot in the style that Mr. Peretti was shot with, it's hard not to come across sounding like you're one side or the other. But I just want to make sure people know that's not the case. We're talking about something that's happened that we believe is morally wrong, is statutorily wrong, and is definitely not something we're just going to gloss over. It was wrong, and there needs to be accountability for that.
Yes. Yeah. Wherever that accountability leads, it needs.
Right.
And I unfortunately, we have to say this. It has to be an open, transparent, and fair process that leads this investigation is conducted under. And we just talked about trust in this collaborative, or in the podcast with Liz. This is where trust is really important. Right now, there's a pretty low trust that people feel in the federal government. Yeah. There's pretty low trust that we see something with our own eyes and we're told it's not true, it's not accurate. That we're all wanting to be able to have greater trust in this process, and I for that reason, this investigation needs to be done with eyes wide open, transparency, and with the best available minds and investigators working on it.
Yeah, we do. Well, we dropped a podcast, or did a podcast a couple of weeks ago on what's called gaslighting, and then we have one that just came out on Snopes, which is a site that for years has been working at trying to find, what is actually real and what is not real on the information we're reading and looking at. We want to encourage all of us, regardless of left, right, or center, to look at that information and make up for ourselves a decision, or make a decision for ourselves on what is true, what is not true, what is factual, what is not factual. And then make our decisions and our belief systems built around what we know to be true. So, this particular shooting of Alex Peretti, there was a picture that came out. It was actually a clip out of a video that was taken, and then I sent it to you, and I said, "Hey, this really speaks about what happened, but is it real? Is it true? Right?" And so before we were going to put it anywhere out there, I believe you sent it to Snopes, and others must have as well.
Yeah.
To review, and Snopes came up with a review. And it turns out that the picture that I had sent Tom was enhanced. The enhancement was there was more contrast. There was sharpening of blurred areas, which is not uncommon. It's an AI process. But what didn't happen in that process was there wasn't features that was added or taken away. The gun wasn't removed, for example, or the gun wasn't shown as firing at the time of the picture was taken. So there was not a change in the composition at all, but there was AI used to sharpen the photograph and to add contrast to it. Which I think is an important distinction, which can impact the emotional response one has to the photo.
Yeah, it did not change what actually happened, is what you're saying, right? Didn't change what actually happened. It was just some enhancement. So,
but this is the kind of thing that we encourage people to do. Even if you look at something or read something that supports your perspective, check it out. Push it to the point of saying, can I trust this information or can I not trust it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked about gaslighting quite a bit in that one video. It was all about gaslighting, right?
Pretty much.
And I going to split hairs a little bit here. Is gaslighting lying? Well, yes. But here's a difference, Tom. Well, let me ask you this question. Wait a minute.
You just said yes, and so
but there is a difference.
Okay,
but there is a difference. So when most people lie about something, what's the motivation?
To change the reality. That to help to change the facts to align with the reality that they want, and they want you to accept.
Well, let me back that up a little bit, though.
Okay.
Let's say you're a kid and you steal a pack of gum, and mom asks you where you got it from, and you lie. What are you trying to do?
Keep the pack of gum.
You're trying to impact yourself. Right?
Yes,
you're trying to get yourself out of trouble. You're trying to
stay out of trouble. Right.
So usually lies are self-serving.
Yes. Okay. Very self-serving.
So gaslighting is lying because it's not truth-telling.
Yeah.
But it is something different, particularly political gaslighting. It's about a strategy to change a narrative for a larger purpose. And so while it's lying, it's not just a reaction, it's a strategy. And that's something I wanted to add to our gaslighting conversation we had before. When we see things like this or hear things where it's obviously not truthful, particularly political gaslighting, is really about a strategy to change a belief system or a way of understanding things.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's more than just trying to CYA.
Yeah, that's right.
Now people may be CYAing, right?
CYA. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Covering your
posterior.
Apple. Yeah, covering your apple. Okay. All right. Or as the Brits would say, your arse.
Arse. Okay. So, but let me ask you this question. Based off what we've been hearing recently, is gaslighting working in this case?
If it were working, people would not be showing up and the numbers are showing up.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. People are saying what I've seen is what I've seen.
That's right.
What we experience is what we experience, no matter how you try to spin it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, this is the, if you really understand gaslighting, you have to know when it works and when it doesn't. And this isn't working.
It ain't working.
It ain't working. And I'm excited. excited's the wrong word. I'm pleased to see that so many are not buying it, regardless of what your political affiliation is, regardless of whether you wanted to believe it or not. You're saying, no, this did not happen. So anyway, I wanted to put those 2 points out there.
I think they're two really good points, and I thank you for doing that. And it fits so nicely with, nothing fits nicely with the death of Alex Preddy, but in acknowledging that tragedy that has happened up there, it fits very well to loop back around and talk a little bit more about gaslighting.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, before we go, we have to acknowledge that today is a holiday. It is called various things. It could be called Festival, I think, in Rio de Janeiro. It could be Mardi Gras in Louisiana. It could be Shrove Tuesday among the most religious among us, and it can also be called Fat Tuesday for those of us that love pancakes, right? So there was a church that I attended years ago that we had a Fat Tuesday celebration as part of Mardi Gras, and and the Lions Club would come in with this gigantic griddle, and they would just make pancakes after pancakes after pancakes, and it was all the pancakes you could eat. Then you just kind of stagger home, pancake drunk, and fall asleep with all of those carbohydrates in you.
Sounds like Thanksgiving.
so that's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to
make some pancakes.
I'm going to make pancakes for Fat Tuesday.
Maybe I ought to make protein pancakes.
I could do that, but that's way too healthy.
All right. Well,
but that protein pancake recipe you gave me is fabulous.
It's awesome, isn't it?
It is awesome.
If anyone would like that recipe for protein pancakes, let me know. I'd be happy to share.
Let Lamar know. I have started putting eggs in everything. By the way, I just want to say.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. It's great.
Maybe in fact today for dinner. I might have protein pancakes. All right.
Gosh, those two. It's almost lunchtime here. I could whip some up. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, it's good to see you. Great conversation today, and we'll talk
Liz
again
was
soon.
Wonderful. All right. Take care.
Tom here. Thank you for listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Remember to click on subscribe to get notices about new episodes, and be sure to like and share the podcast as well. Opinions and ideas expressed in this podcast are solely those of Lamar Roth and Tom Klaus, and we'd like to hear your opinions and ideas too. You can leave us a voice message on Spotify, or you can email us at the addresses found in the show notes. Also, in the show notes, you can find links to some of the things we talked about today, so you can check them out yourself. Until next time, keep moving forward toward third space.
This podcast was reviewed and approved by Jake and Ebby Dogs Incorporated.